And we're going to proceed with the discussion with Mr. Jim Dunn, who came all the way from the UK to share with us more about changing thought patterns for becoming a better and more productive person.
In the previous panel, we discussed the need for changes. Changes in the economy, structural changes. But the prerequisite for any change to take place is to change our mindsets, change our culture. For which reason we invited two prominent speakers to share their thoughts and views on this very important topic. As Bilan explained, our country fellow, Dr. Adizes, was not available to join us here physically, and also the technology failed, so the video is not of the best quality, so for which reason you're going to see it at home, I believe. But nevertheless, we have here with us Dr. Jim Dunn, who's the project director of the Pacific Institute in the United Kingdom. Jim Dunn is a project director since 2001 when he joined the institute. It's an international consultancy group specializing in behavior and culture change and organizational development. He is currently a member of the corporate team and has a role of a project director for Europe. He is the author of several books, including The Effective Leader, The Smart Guide to Work, and a fiction series for teenagers. He has trained many people globally to transform their mindset. Now we invite him to speak about transforming the culture and thought patterns to bring about changes desired by individuals and groups. Mr. Dunn, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. My name is Jim Dunn, and I'm really very pleased to be at this conference today and have the opportunity of speaking and sharing with you. I want to thank the board, Macedonia 2025, for inviting me to be here. Our chief executive in the UK, UKU and Europe was also invited, but unfortunately he's not been able to attend, but he's following what goes on here very closely indeed, and I'll be talking to him tomorrow when I get back to London. As Zoran has said, I represent the Pacific Institute. We're a global consultancy based in Seattle, in Washington, and we have offices around the world, and I'm connected with the UK operation, which is based in London. We are behaviour and culture change specialists. We work in both the private and the public sectors within businesses. Incidentally, the Royal Bank of Scotland that has climbed back out of the disastrous crash under the leadership of their man Fred the Shred, as he was known in Edinburgh. The Royal Bank of Scotland are now a big client of ours, a client of the Pacific Institute. New Zealand Airlines are another client. We work with businesses, we work with government departments, with education establishments, and with voluntary sector organisations as well. And I'm glad that we're actually also here in Macedonia. Through our partners, one of our partners is a junior board member of Macedonia 25, and they're in a position now to take our programs and processes, or some of them at least, and deliver them for Macedonians. It's Pacific Institute material for Macedonians, delivered by Macedonians, and we're very proud of that and hope that the business is really going to develop in the area. We're not about making money, we're all about trying to make a difference, which I think is one of the things behind this very wonderful conference. I'm not actually here to promote our company, but to talk to you about transforming cultures in order to improve performance and give us the results that we're all seeking individually and collectively. That's actually my theme. And over the last couple of decades, I would say, there has been a shift in emphasis from managing what we would call tangible assets, things like plant and equipment and material and resources, to the emphasis we now put upon managing intangible assets, things like customer relations, motivation, creativity, high quality operating procedures, and that sort of thing. I quote from a research paper called A New Math for a New World. And according to this, back in the 80s, around 68% of the effort and the time was being put into measuring and managing tangible assets. I remember so well, during those days, I was in the steel industry. I spent many years in the steel industry, and I had a fairly senior position in that organization. And I was there at the time when British Steel went from being nationally owned and it was being sold privately. And we were there waiting for the investors, and my boss was there, and he said we had a great pile of papers, and it was all about technology and plant and resources and techniques and the like. And he said when the investors came in, they brushed all that aside. They said, don't want to know about that, tell us about your people. He said we panicked, went right to the bottom of the pile. We found one bit of paper. It was all about the people. That has actually changed now, and in the 90s the focus went the other way. It became more like 30% focus on measuring tangible assets, and 70% of the effort was going into managing the intangible stuff. And since the beginning of the 21st century, it's now running at around 15% being placed on managing tangible assets, and as a staggering 85% of time and effort is going into managing and measuring and developing intangible assets. You can make of that what you will, but one thing is certainly clear. One thing very clear, there's now considerable emphasis being placed upon tapping the intellectual and the psychological capital within companies and organizations right around the world. Intangible assets are the outcomes of culture. Outcomes of culture. And culture is being widely seen now, right around the world, as the key driver of performance and the attainment of goals, not just within organizations, but within communities and sometimes even within nations. Culture is the king. It's claimed with some justification that culture is more important than vision or strategy. You can have the best vision in the world, clear and precise. You can have the greatest strategic plans for putting it into place. If the culture doesn't support it, it won't happen. It won't happen. We've got to look at the culture. A few decades ago, a couple of researchers undertook a landmark study into this. The names were Porter and Heskett. They were both professors at Harvard University, and they followed the fortunes of 207 US companies, many of them in the Fortune 500 bracket, over an 11-year period. Some of the companies were Walmart, Northwest Airlines, it was them. They noted that some of the companies had what they called adaptive cultures. They encouraged innovation, they stimulated creativity. It's the kind of thing that Mike, who was sitting here, was talking to us about yesterday, when you get companies where they've got high expectations, high values, they're a meritocracy, and there's a big concern for the development of people. The other companies, they noted, had the opposite of that, non-adaptive cultures. Porter and Heskett published the results under 3 headings. Revenue, now listen to this, share price and net income. I'll give you the figures. I'm not bothered with a PowerPoint presentation here. We just use the one slide here. But here's the figures. For the non-adaptive cultures, the revenue went up over the 11-year period by 166%. The share price went up by 74% over the same period, and the net income, notice this, the net income went up, how much do you think it went up by? 1%. So the turnover is increasing, but there's not much of it making its way to the bottom line. Bureaucracies do that, they eat up overhead. For the adaptive culture companies, the revenue went up over the same period by 682% compared with the 166 in the non-adaptive cultures. The share price, notice this, went up by 901% compared with 74% in the companies with the non-adaptive cultures. But here's the killer. Here is it, where would you put your money? The net profit in companies that had adaptive cultures went up over an 11-year period by 756%, compared with 1% in non-adaptive cultures. Where would you put your money? I've seen this pattern replicated many times in different sectors, in health, in community, in public sector areas where the KPIs, the key performance indicators, relevant to the industry might be different, but the results are the same. There are many, many case studies available that explain this and that validate the whole thing. But in the interest of time and to help this discussion, this brief discussion, I'm just going to say a few words about each of the following things. 1, how cultures evolve. 2, how cultures can be measured. And 3, how cultures can be changed. I found that the number of definitions of what culture is about the same as the number of people who are trying to define it. Well, culture's the glue that holds us together. It's the way we do things around here. Culture is an aggregation, that's a big word, an aggregation of behaviors. When you get a critical mass of people behaving and acting in the same way, you've got a force to be reckoned with. As I found to my cost when I tried to introduce things like teamworking and the like within the steel industry. Culture is a force. It's an invisible force. You don't always know it's there, so you disregard it. You don't always know it's there until you run into it, until you come up against it. In the great city of Leeds in England, we have a graffiti artist. He calls himself the Skating Vicar. I don't know why he calls himself that, but that's his name. And he put a great, massive piece of graffiti up on the side of a wall, and I remember it was a good one. It read like this: you can't see the bars in this society until you try to get out. Culture keeps us from getting out with new ideas, getting out with new and better ways of doing business. And you know, culture also keeps us wanting to be in, because cultures create comfort zones. That's culture. Now the concept of culture has actually evolved over the years. It used to be that the words culture and society were used interchangeably as though they meant the same things. For many years the term culture was actually used to designate the way of life in a society. But nowadays the term is used to describe the behaviors and the norms that are found in all types of organizations within a society. That's where the focus tends to be now. As a matter of fact, you may be interested in this, but following the crash of the Columbia Space Shuttle, way back a good few years ago now, the culture at NASA came into question. And some indication that the disaster may have been caused in part, at least, as a result of a change from a completely technical culture to a bureaucratically controlled business culture, which led to the erosion of a safety-first engineering culture. Well, I don't know. But I do know this, that nowadays meetings of engineers and managers at NASA take round a horseshoe-shaped table, which indicates that this is a team. And it's not a facility for one person to do all the talking, as though I do the thinking and you all get thumped. It's not like that anymore. Currently, even yet, there's a lot of attention being paid to the cultures within the FBI and the CIA following the 9/11 tragedy. Formerly, the talk would have been about a breakdown in communications, but now it's focused on the phenomenon of this thing called culture. Culture has actually evolved as a concept to become more what we think of it today. Robert Sternberg is one of America's foremost psychologists, is a past president of the American Psychological Association. In a book that he published fairly recently, has emphasized the need, and I like this, for us to become, he says, culturally competent in a world that's becoming increasingly globalized and complex. Research on societies, I would say, is a broader undertaking than focusing attention on a culture within it. But how does culture form? Well, our studies over the years, which are statistically sound. When I studied psychology to quite a fairly high level, I was astonished at the amount of statistics and mathematics I had to do. I didn't think it was about that. But our studies, which are statistically sound as well as psychologically sound, actually show that there's a strong statistical correlation between leadership, culture, and performance. You can't argue with it. It's statistically very strong. In fact, it's so strong that we can now safely say that culture drives performance. I think the correlation, if I remember right, is about 0.506, which means that culture is responsible for about 36% of it. It's by far the biggest contributor to performance as a performance driver. And so it drives performance. And the thing that causes culture to develop into what it is, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, is leadership. It's not the people. It's the way the people are being led. It's the way things are being led. There's a very strong, equally strong correlation between leadership effectiveness and culture. It's mostly down to leadership. That's the evolution of culture. Now, culture can be measured. And if you want to know what the culture is like in your organization or your company, then here is how you do it. There's two types of culture in anybody's book. Remember I mentioned Cotter and Hosket a few moments ago, Cotter and Heskett a few moments ago, and they talked about adaptive and non-adaptive cultures. Nowadays we talk about constructive and defensive cultures. We define them as constructive and we define others as defensive. And defensive cultures are subdivided. I don't want to bore you with this or complicate the details too much, but defensive cultures are further subdivided into aggressive defensive, I will oppose you, and passive defensive, I'll do as I'm told. And we have these two types of culture, and it's just worth mentioning in passing that every culture that I've been involved personally in measuring, police, health service, quite a few, every single one has been defensive. There's an awful lot of defensive cultures around. That's why the statistic that 72% of all initiatives that are begun in companies fail within the first year. Did you know that? 72% of all the new initiatives that are started in companies fail within the first year, because mostly it's because they're launched in defensive cultures which don't support that kind of thing, don't support innovation. There's a total of 12 behavioral styles. I won't go into any details with this. You can learn about this later if you wish. And there's 4 for each of the three divisions. And these behavioral styles are then analysed by getting a sample from the population. It doesn't need to be everybody, but a sample from the population. Take a vertical slice and get them to complete a carefully worded questionnaire. It's not an employee survey. Not an employee survey. Carefully worded questionnaire. And they do one questionnaire for the way things are now, sort of thing I was talking about yesterday, to define what is current reality, what are we like now. They do one for what it's like now, and they do another one for vision. What would we like it to be? It's astonishing. At the end of the day, despite all our differences, everybody really wants the same thing at the end of the day. So there's a survey conducted that covers vision and current reality, and when the results are analysed and interpreted, you get a picture of the culture as it is, and also of the way you would actually like it to be. And in addition to that, we also get some very important information that's unique to the organisation or the group, which really spells out the sorts of things you have to do in order to change it. So you give yourself a set of cultural goals, and these are going to be addressed as well as the vision or business goals and the strategic goals. And that's done online. It can be done fairly quickly and fairly inexpensively. And now that you've got the picture, how do you change it? We've got a picture, we know what the culture's like, we know what we would like it to be. How do we actually change it? There has to be a series of interventions, starting with the leaders and the key influencers. Because as I said a moment ago, the key to leadership effectiveness lies in examining the strategies that they employ. And the key to changing culture lies in dealing with the leadership first, because culture is a top-down process. It begins at the top. It has to begin with leaders. And so we have a similar process, similar to the culture measurement exercise. And from this, again, fairly similar process, we're able to identify the kind of strategies that the leaders are employing. We have 12 domains. And we can then, as a result of that, sit down and talk with the leader and identify to them why they're having the kind of impact on the company or on the group or on the department or whatever it is, and what they have to change or what they have to do to make it so that they have the kind of impact that they really want to have. Again, the great majority of the leaders that I've been privileged to be involved in mentoring, and some of them are very senior people, my own colleagues who were directors in the company, and most of the people that I've been involved in personally mentoring in this way, they think they're having a certain kind of impact on the culture, and the reality is quite different. And that's quite embarrassing. Don't tell me that I'm doing that. They think they're having a positive, creative influence. The reality, in most cases, is it's something quite completely different, and you can't argue with the statistics. And so, going through that process, the leader gets a very good indication of where it is that they actually need to change. You can pinpoint the changes the leader has to make in order to make the right kind of impact. There's no good just telling us to try hard. Trying hard doesn't work. Trying hard doesn't work. The leader and those he's leading, that's the followers, they really need to go through an intervention, a structured process that helps them understand how to change personally and professionally. The sort of thing that I was just really lightly touching on yesterday, talking to the youth about the thought patterns of high-performance people. You really need to go through an experience and be exposed to the kind of things that you have to learn and understand, and then learn how to apply and do in order to make these changes. And I repeat again, at the risk of boring you, these processes are available to you now in Macedonia. I'm really pleased about that, because I think it's a wonderful thing. When the culture of an organization, I'm nearly finished, when it gets fixed, it actually becomes difficult to change. Even when it's clear that the change is going to lead to better things. Trying to change the culture can sometimes be like running in concrete or walking in concrete. I'm from Glasgow. I keep saying that. I'm proud of it. And in Glasgow during the 1950s, there was a massive social experiment took place. And I was part of it. In those days, there was almost 2 million people lived in Glasgow, population about the same size as Macedonia, and there was about 1 million of them lived in poverty. It was terrible. They lived in poverty, and the council decided, good council, to take these people out of the slum conditions and rehouse them in beautiful new homes. And they built 4 great big housing estates, one at each corner of the city. They're there in the Vale of Clyde. And they moved everybody in there thinking that would make the change. I want to tell you this, that within a year of moving, everything went back to the way it was before they moved. And I remember hearing that the Lord Provost, that's what they call them in Scotland, the Lord Provost said at a council meeting, he says, we've failed here. And he said, the reason we failed is this: we took the people out of the slums, but we never took the slums out of the people. And you've got to take the slums out of the people, metaphorically. We have a saying in our business, all meaningful and lasting change, whatever is meaningful to you, starts on the inside and works its way out. Seldom is it the other way. People are not changed by moral exhortation. They're not. They're not. What they are changed by is a transformed imagination. Not moral exhortation, but a transformed imagination. There is a girls' private school in England where the girls aged about 12 and 13 years of age were actually starting to experiment with using lipstick. And what they did was they put the lipstick on, and then they would, in the washrooms, they'd press their lips up against the mirrors, and they get the little lipstick imprints all over the mirrors. What a mess! But that's what they did. It was a culture thing, a habit forming. They all did it. And they got this culture habit of pressing their lips onto the mirror in the restrooms. The cleaner complained to the headmistress. And the headmistress got the girls together and she exhorted them to really stop this and have compassion on the poor cleaner. Do you think that made any difference? No, it didn't make any difference at all. The lipstick marks kept appearing on the mirror. The cleaner complained again, and this time the headmistress threatened the girls. You know, carrot, now stick. She threatened them with all sorts. Do you think it made any difference? No, it didn't. The lipstick marks kept complaining, kept being there. The cleaner got fed up with this and said to the headmistress, would you let me speak to the girls? She said yes, to bring them all into the restroom. And the cleaner, in front of the girls, she said, girls, you give me a terrible job cleaning the lipstick marks that you make off these mirrors. Let me show you how difficult it is and what I have to do to get these mirrors clean. So she says, stand back. And she took a mop. You know a thing you used to clean the floor? A mop. And she went into one of the cubicles and she shoved the mop down the toilet and dragged it out dripping wet. Mind yourself. And then she started to clean the mirrors. Well, hey, got him clean. I'll tell you this, there was no more lipstick marks on the mirrors after that. People are not changed. Not changed by moral exhortation, but they are changed by a transformed imagination. Yes. And that's what leaders have to do. Napoleon Bonaparte, there was a man that could march on. He said, if you want to lead people, you have to show them a future. And that's what you guys are doing. I've been humbled and inspired listening to all of this stuff. I think it's great. A leader, if you're going to lead people, you have to show them a future. When Moses, all those years ago, led the people of Israel through the wilderness to the promised land, what a journey that was. But he did it by convincing them that the place to where they were going was far better than the one that they were leaving behind. And I believe that this is a great journey, a difficult journey. Changing culture is not easy. It's like putting toothpaste back in a tube. It's not easy, but it can be done. And it's worth doing. It's worth making the journey. And I believe that each and every person in this great country of yours, and it is a great country. We look at Macedonia in the UK, we talk about it, it's a great country. And more people coming here as tourists now, I can tell you as well, they keep talking about it. I believe that every person in this great country of yours deserves the chance to fulfill the God-given potential. Every single one of them, from the cleaner right up to the top. And God, talking about God, and enlightened psychologists see us, and we better say it this way, we're not just broken people who need to be made whole. We are people with potential that needs to be fulfilled and deserves to be fulfilled. So I just say this, may God continue to get there where you're going with your people, continue to help you. I love what you're doing. I've enjoyed being at this conference. I've enjoyed speaking to you, and thank you for listening.
Jim, fantastic speech, very inspirational. Now I would like to open up for Q&A. Any questions for Jim?
This is the difficult part, yeah.
Mike?
Yes, Mike.
Jim, again, thank you very much. That was absolutely spot on. But I also thought maybe you can comment briefly when you talked from last night. From the group last night, we had a TED-like talks. And what Jim spoke about is people thinking positively and people thinking negatively. The 18 and 82% thought, maybe if you could just give a 1-minute summary, which I found that to be very thought-provoking, individually and obviously as an organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, over there.
Yeah.
Oh, can you just repeat that again, what you said?
I mean, if you could just make a couple comments.
Yeah,
The
sure.
highlights of the 18 and 82% and some of the
Yeah.
recommendations for the group.
Yeah. It comes back to us as leaders, giving people hope and showing them that there's a way, and filling their mind with the right kind of ideas. People's heads, a lot of their heads are down, and they want lifting up. And if you can get them to focus and show them that there's a way forward for them, which I really think you're trying to do at every level in this society here, then they'll pick up on it. Briefly, when I was in steel, one of my bosses said to me, he said, your job is this, you've got to tell us what we should be doing, and then you've got to show us how to do it, and then you've got to help us to do it. And I think that's a kind of a role here with people who are thinking negatively. Tell them what they should be doing, show them how to do it, and then help them to actually do it. If you can do that, that'll move things on quite a bit, yeah. Sorry.
I have a question, if I might. Jim, thank you very much. It truly was inspirational. I work for a global... Sorry.
I was just going to ask you to introduce yourself.
I'm Lou Macedonia, honorary board member at Macedonia 2025, and I work for a global mining company called Ichak Gold. Now we have 4 values which our corporation believes defines our culture. And one of the things that's particularly challenging for those of us in management is when we're confronted with very deep cynicism amongst staff who can, if they can remember the 4 values, don't entirely buy into them. In your experience, are there any ways in which a company can more effectively introduce a values-based culture, and how best to get the buy-in from employees? This has been a real challenge.
Very quickly, without rushing in with an answer, Lou, I think there's 2 things. One, you've got to model the values yourself. I wish I had a pound or a Macedonian dollar for every time I've heard people say to me, don't talk to me, you want to tell my boss about this. He's the one that should be actually doing it. We've got to model the way forward. That would be the thing to do. And secondly, keep making the stump speech. 72% of folk are disconnected from their organisation. They don't think that what they do makes any difference. And that's a significant statistic. Keep showing them, model it yourself, be the change that you want others to see, and then keep making the stump speech. Education, education, education. And folk eventually get the message. It's quite surprising. That may seem a simplistic answer, but it's a good place to start, I think.
More questions? Yes. Please be short and concise.
Philip Izovsky, SAP, Germany. How does culture translate into this whole new gig economy? So where you don't have lifetime employment, there's a whole new change happening where people do not work for you the whole lifetime. So you don't work for large corporations, but you're actually outsourcing your services. So, or you're part of a global network of partners. So how does culture really work in such organizations where people are not directly reporting to you or they're not on your payroll? How do you make sure you get that culture?
Yeah, it's a kind of a disaggregated group. We've got groups of people who are becoming continuously, progressively less well acquainted with each other. I think it's the markets at the end of the day that they're selling into that are going to be the decider, and it's almost a kind of message gets sent out that if you're going to work on your own and going to work remotely, but you want to make a success of it, then there's a certain way that you have to do business because this is the way we like it to be, and so that in a sense determines the kind of culture that you have to actually buy into. It's a different way of doing business, and the old way dies hard. But as I say, culture keeps us where we want to be, keeps us from getting out into new ways. But yeah, I know what you mean. We've got people sitting in their houses, and I mean, I do it as well to a certain extent. But the point is that you cannot succeed in that sort of thing unless you follow certain norms. For example, I expect that if I send for something that somebody that I'm never going to see is going to sell me, I expect it to be there the following day. That's the norm. And the guy at the other end is going to get himself geared up so that he can actually deliver that. The e-business is a good example of e-commerce. but that kind of thing is happening more and more. And I'm a friend of a clinical psychologist at Glasgow University, and he's making a small fortune by going into the selling little booklets that have to do with why can't I sleep at night. He's got 5 or 6 little books, and nobody sees them, nobody ever meets them, but he's turned his garage into a warehouse. It's full of little booklets. He employs them over 3 days a week to come in and send these things out, because the market is selling it into demands it. If I ask for this and pay the money, I expect it to be there. I don't think I'm going to have to ring you up and contact you 7 days later and say, where is it, you know? So there's a different kind of culture, but it's more related to what the market's actually demanding of us, and it means I have to change the way I do things. I don't know whether that's a very good example, but it's the best I can think of on my feet at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll have 1 or 2 short questions. I saw a hand over there.
Hi, my name is Vera Lalchevska, and I'm a candidate for a doctoral degree in Geneva, Switzerland. And I am currently founding an organization called Cultural Rights Group. So thank you very much for this emphasis on culture and on the importance of culture. But I wanted to ask you on a different take on culture. My PhD is on the name issue between Greece and Macedonia and the importance of an identity. And I'm treating it from the aspect of the cultural rights of Macedonians, and specifically the right to self-determination, which is Article 1 of both international covenants on civil political rights and on economic, social, and cultural rights. And I was wondering if you could comment, do you think that if Macedonia was a business and the Macedonian identity was our culture, how would you go about promoting that culture, and would you necessarily promote this adaptive culture or the one that remains?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think Michael might be saying this, but Macedonia is a business, you know, in many respects. And I would say that the things that we heard this morning, they sound great. I mean, that's the way to promote what I would call, or Kotorneski would call, an adaptive culture. Keep doing that. I think the interesting thing, in the United States, they're getting worried about the development of a culture of entitlement. You know, one senator said to us, he said, this country wasn't built on that kind of thing at all. That it's not, I don't have to work for this, I'm entitled to it, just give me it. And they said, as well as a statue of liberty, we should alongside that put a statue of responsibility. You know, we've got that side of it to think about as well. And so I would say, just keep doing what you're doing. It doesn't conflict with anything of what we've been saying, and I think Macedonia looks and sounds very much to be as though it's heading on down the road of becoming a constructive culture where people are valued and where they're encouraged, and I think it would fit very nicely with the 4 behavioural styles that I was talking about. Yeah. I don't know if that's a very good answer, but there it is. Thank you.
Last question. Okay, probably certainly mine. You stress the need for culture change, which oftentimes is a barrier for progress. But how about, would culture change mean also changing core values? Or can you retain your core values while changing your culture in order to be adaptive, to be receptive for these changes?
Yeah, I think thank you. That becomes a moral thing, and my immediate response to that is, if your core values are right, morally right, humanly right, then there's no need to change them in order to develop the sort of culture. It's the culture that really that has to be aligned with that. But good examples of this from the Prime Minister, where he talked about a very, very similar sort of thing. Yeah, you can. The culture can be adapted to the goals. You don't have to adapt the values. You don't have to adapt the values to suit the culture. It's the culture that makes it happen. It's the means to the end. But it's not an end in itself. It's not God or King. It's a means to an end. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Dunn. I think this completes our second panel.
We're truly delighted that people like Mr. Jim Dunn come to Macedonia to share their wisdom with all of us. So thank you for coming and for sharing your words.